Hey y'all, welcome back to the lab. In this video, we're talking about how 1 million checkboxes was built, going into its tech stack and system design. And this is the real 1 million checkboxes, not the one I built. Now, 1millioncheckboxes.com was a website that allowed the website to check, or the internet to check and uncheck global checkboxes. It was a hit for the few weeks it was alive and inspired me to create my own version with HTMX. OMCB's creator, Nolan Royalty, aka EIEIO Games, recently did a talk explaining how and why he built it. Now, naturally, I was curious and wanted to compare notes, so in this post, we'll summarize how OMCB worked, its tech stack, system design, and things we can learn from it. Okay, so how 1 million checkboxes works. So here's a basic diagram, and essentially, you come to the website, you get your static content, your static HTML or whatever. This is going to load React on the page, and it will also get the bit set. Basically, it seems like they were holding all 1 million checkboxes state as bits. And then basically, he's using React window here to, as you move, only render the boxes that are within the display port. So not everything is rendered on the front end, just the things that are within the display port. And then when you check a checkbox, this will send it to the backend, and the backend will emit that to all of the clients. So that's the basic idea, and all that information is here. This stuff is going through Websockets, and you are periodically sent the full state of all checkboxes, which is an interesting pattern we'll talk about later. But basically, the idea behind that was to try and make sure that the clients were always up to date, and so if you were to like scroll really fast, you would always see a page that is like alive. There's no like default null loading state, which has its pros and cons, you know. The form that it eventually ended up being is like this array thing where basically it has all of the checked indexes first and then unchecked indexes after. It used to be JSON, but he said that he moved to this because it was just a lot smaller and bandwidth was being an issue. And then, yeah, as the boxes are checked and unchecked, you know, the WebSocket, you're getting down these deltas. A lot of times it's going to be small, but sometimes they are sending the full refresh, and this is a way to kind of make up for the idea of asynchronicity you might have gotten out of sync at some point. And so sending the full refresh, make sure that you get the latest update on this page. And then the way this happens is when you check a box, you know, it's sent to the server via the WebSocket, and then the change is batched and sent to Redis, and then it emits a delta. It's unclear if the Redis is actually being the pub sub or if the pub sub happens before this is pushed to Redis. But either way, a delta is created and then it's pushed to all the attached clients of all of the servers. And yeah, one thing to note is that, like, yes, while the client is only lazily rendering these things and only looking at the boxes that are currently visible in the viewport and only rendering those, they are getting all of the updates from the server, which is an interesting choice. And the creator did say that, you know, they did this to make it feel more alive, again, so you can scroll to whatever part of the page and it's like already on. But you can imagine that that's like quite a lot of data passage for something that you probably won't see. Okay, on to the tech stack. So basically this is what the server looks like. It was hosted on DigitalOcean Droplets. So the creator was, you know, self-hosting, if you will. I call it self-hosting. Some people think it's not self-hosting, but it's basically self-hosting. They just set up the server for you. And then have the servers here. This looks like it's one server, but really these were actually multiple servers, I believe, handling this Flask stuff. And so Nginx is the reverse proxy, doing some load balancing to the Flask servers that are available. And then the Flask servers would, like, you know, push their updates to the database. This would change this, and then, you know, it would be pub subbed out to all of these Flask servers, and they would emit it back to whoever their client is. So that's basically how it went. Redis is known for being like a very fast database, and so clearly this seems to work here. Python is also an interesting choice for this, and I'm going to talk about that in a minute as well. So yeah, for some details, the front end was React with React Window. The React Window is how they were doing the lazy loading for selectively rendering the viewport. For the back end, it was Python Flask and was being horizontally scaled with Nginx as the router and load balancer. Database was Redis, managed by DigitalOcean. They have a bunch of like managed database options from like Postgres to MySQL and Redis and stuff like that, so you don't have to worry about like spinning it up or even doing upgrades on it or anything like that. And then for hosting, at peak, they had 8 gigabyte RAM, 50 gigabyte disk servers from DigitalOcean. These are probably DigitalOcean droplets. I'm not sure what the vCPUs on these were because it didn't really show it in the slide, but I would imagine that is probably 4 vCPUs. Usually it's like double the RAM for the CPUs on standard configuration. So I'd imagine it's 4 vCPU 8GB RAM machines. I'm just running Ubuntu 2024. So that's the overview of the tech stack. Now I wanted to point out a few other interesting highlights and things to note and to think about. So first, some interesting stats. The total boxes checked were about 650 million. I don't know if they had stats on how many people were there, but I think they mentioned like 500,000 in 1 week. The total cost to run all of this infrastructure for the few weeks it was on was $800, which like is not crazy, but it is more than you'd want to spend on just like nothing. Another interesting to call out is Python to Go. So the backend started as Python Flask, as we saw in the tech stack, but it was later migrated to Go for performance reasons. And Go was substantially faster by about like 20x. And so when we think about that, starting with Go may have saved many of the required optimizations and horizontal scale needed for this. And so, at 20x faster, this may have severely cut down on the total server cost, perhaps saving several $100s. We don't really know what the total cost breakdown is and if it's like mostly bandwidth or mostly servers, but I mean, running 8 4 vCPU servers quickly gets expensive on something like DigitalOcean. So I'd imagine this would at least reduce that significantly. And here we can see a readout from some of these servers. Like, it's not really maxed when it was running Python, right? Like, really, it's only like 30% sustained usage, but there's like a lot of these spikes. And so clearly they're like bottlenecking on some sort of operation here. But as soon as they hit go, they're down to about 5% of the server. And so you can imagine that, this server could probably do another 15x amount of work and get up here and still be totally fine. Another thing to talk about is hosting costs. And so server cost is likely not the only major contributor to, the $800 that we saw. Bandwidth was a major concern throughout, given the large amount of concurrent clients and how much data was passing between them. Like I said, every checked box triggers a data mission to all clients. And so, every single update is like very small. But when you do that multiplication across like 650 million, it gets quite big. And so, DigitalOcean is actually a pretty good choice for doing something bandwidth heavy on this. They have relatively cheap data egress, but it is not the cheapest. And so other cloud host providers like Hetzner or OVH would have saved about 90% or 100% on bandwidth costs respectively. Every time I show this chart, people get like a little wild, but yeah, so DigitalOcean is here at about $10 per terabyte, which is pretty good. You can see, some of the big guys like AWS is 90, Azure 87, Google Cloud is 85. And so this is like much cheaper than a lot of the other providers down here, but you can always get cheaper. And so Hetzner only costs about $1 per terabyte. And then some places like OVH Cloud and NetCloud, they actually give unlimited traffic. Though usually unlimited has an asterisk. It's like, we will still let your traffic through, but constrained. But at least, by choosing one of these, the bandwidth costs would have been significantly reduced. And by the same token, a 4 vCPU 8GB RAM server at DigitalOcean costs about $48 a month, while a similar server can be found cheaper elsewhere, around $18 on Hetzner. I have another chart for this here. You can see like DigitalOcean, middle of the pack, pretty good compared to, a lot of other providers. But you can always get cheaper. Here's the 4 vCPU configurations. This bigger. DigitalOcean here, about $48 for the standard configuration, and then you can see we've got OVH, Hetzner, NetCup, Contabo, all much cheaper over here. But again, like DigitalOcean is a good choice. Like you're not paying 98 or 150 or 200 for the same amount, so pretty decent. And I know this project is like just for fun, and so like over optimizing everything maybe it's just kind of like overdoing it, and that's not the point. But I do think cost can be a very limiting factor, especially if you're not making money on the project. And this is one of the, main constraints and values that EIO said he had going in. And so this is something to always keep in mind. And this is one of the reasons that I'm personally self-hosting many of my projects with Coolify currently on Hetzner to kind of cap and reduce ongoing costs so I can build more. And I think if I could give like any advice in this area it would be like, whatever you do, try to find something that has a capped upper limit. Serverless is like a really fun idea. But the problem with unlimited scale is it can also do unlimited cost. And so, you don't necessarily have to self-host like I'm doing. You can use a more managed thing like DigitalOcean, but just try to find something where it allows you to cap the cost, or at least cap the resources you're using, which by proxy cap the cost. Just doing a VPS is often a great way to do that. And there's also like serverless containers like Cloud Run or DigitalOcean App Platform that are kind of an in-between between serverless, because you can tell it to scale to just one server max. But there's levels to this, but like stay away from serverless functions if you can. Okay, final thing to talk about is WebSockets. So I think WebSockets are cool and definitely are a way to achieve real-time communication over like long distances, but I am still not convinced they are good at scale despite everyone telling me that they are. And I think the issue really lies in fan out. So one update leads to in fan out, and this makes like a simple write operation, which is like already like probably going to be something a little bit heavy, turn it into something that scales by the current users, which is just hard. It makes something that feels like it should be an O of 1 into an O of n every single time. And I think for like apps that can handle this load, it's great. And I'm thinking of like collaboration apps that are constrained in the number of users, like maybe, I don't know how Google Docs does it, but I gotta assume it's like some sort of WebSockets. Like that's fine because the max users of n is going to be like 6. Maybe Figma does this or something, real-time games where it's like less than 16, I think is fine. But for like an app where you have like, 100,000 people on at the same time, it seems questionable. And so for those apps that like can't do this, either it's going to start updating slowly because you're going to start lagging because the whole process of doing this fan out is going to cost a long time. And so you're going to move away from the real-time idea more towards an async approach anyway, or you're going to have to drop data in which you're not syncing at all. And a lot of the talk was about setting caps on bandwidth usage coming out of the servers. And what that means is that you are literally just dropping random data. And so that data updates aren't even getting there. So like, what's the point? And yeah, in OMCB's case, it seems to be doing both, right? They're capping the max bandwidth coming out of these servers, which means you're just losing updates and data. And you're already having potential out of sync updates, which requires full pushes every now and then, which is kind of like solving this problem of not being able to scale this way by sending more data, which makes it even less scalable, which is interesting. And so I think if both scalability of the bandwidth usage you have and your ability to perform real-time updates becomes a problem, then WebSockets may not be the right answer. And this is one of the reasons that I decided to go with polling for my version of 1 million checkboxes. It is highly cacheable, so I'm doing like the smallest amount of work possible. When someone reads me, client can ask for just what it needs, so I don't have to send out like all the updates or anything. You can literally just tell me the section you're looking at, I'll give it to you. And there's no wasted bandwidth sending data clients don't actually need and aren't actually actively looking at. And now there are downsides to this, like it doesn't update as fast. My latency is in seconds versus, whatever 1 million checkboxes was. And it does waste bandwidth sending boxes that haven't changed. Like if you ask for this section, I will just send you everything because I don't know what you have. It's stateless. But generally, I'm okay with these trade-offs. And makes this much, much more scalable in general. Now that said, I do think much of the WebSocket scalability issue in this tech stack really just comes from sending all updates to all clients, even if they're like not looking at it. I think if it was just capped to the boxes and maybe some buffer on each side that the client was actually looking at, it would probably cut down on bandwidth updates by around 99% because at most you're probably looking at like 1,000 or 5,000 checkboxes, but that means we're saving like 990,000 checkboxes that we're not sending you updates for. So if this was still alive, that's probably an efficiency that should be in place. Next. Now, I've really enjoyed playing with 1 million checkboxes and learning about how it's put together. If you're interested in more background on this project, I would highly recommend EIEIO's talk on it, as it touches on a bunch more stuff, including like why they built it, a bunch of stuff on game theory, and some fun stories along the way. Now, I, for one, am looking forward to the next EIEIO game to play and maybe break and copy. Now, if you like this post, you might also like 1 million checkboxes, globally synced data with HTMX, my clone of this site, and how I built it as a hypermedia first app. You might also be interested in hosting my Docker container on a VPS with Coolify as a platform as a service with GitHub auto deploys, which is basically like a walkthrough of how I'm doing quote unquote self-hosting, but in a way that kind of resembles a normal cloud. So I can get the benefits of, self-hosting, but don't have to go through like necessarily all the pain of running my server. And then finally, spin up a full stack F# web app in 10 minutes with the Cloud Seed project template. This is basically a distillation of all the things I've learned building web apps with F# and how I like to build them to try and make doing so faster. And so this is how I basically start all of my projects these days. So that's it for this video. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.